Just in addition to what Reverend Collins said about John McCain, we are grateful for the tremendous sacrifices Senator John McCain made for our country in serving 5 years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, while enduring, as we know, excruciating pain and terror. And we are thankful for all those members of the armed services who have demonstrated bravery and their willingness to pay the highest sacrifices for the cause of freedom. And so our prayers today are with Senator McCain's family at this time of their loss. Last Sunday, in the 4 Good Ways to Kick Off the Fall sermon series, we kicked off with Make No Excuses, emphasizing accountability and responsibility, using illustrations from a wide variety of people, some of whom overcame significant roadblocks and obstacles to success, never using those same obstacles and roadblocks as excuses. We also talked about some biblical characters and parables, some of which demonstrated the propensity to use excuses to not join in the enterprise of God's kingdom to help pave the way for achieving Christ's mission of goodness and love. The text last Sunday was from Galatians. Each one must examine his own work. Each one will bear his own load, emphasizing spiritual accountability and the importance of carrying our fair share of responsibility to strengthen the Christian outreach. And most importantly, within that, telling others about Jesus Christ, staying faithful to the first 6 words of our mission statement to create disciples for Jesus Christ. Today we talk about the topic, listen and communicate. Did you ever talk to someone and leave the conversation thinking that they had never heard anything that you had to say during that entire conversation? Never heard a word of what you said? Did you ever do most of the talking of yourself and leave the conversation thinking that you neglected to ask anything about that person's life? Did you ever consider the fact that you ever grow tired listening to another person talk too much? Did your son or daughter ever say to you, "Mom, you're not listening to me"? Or "Dad, you're not listening to me"? Or husband to wife, or wife to husband, "You're not hearing what I'm saying"? The old adage, the Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we talk. In premarital sessions I've had with couples, I've used what's called a pre-marriage awareness inventory, which has a section called communication. The first multiple choice question is, I honestly think communication is something, fill in the blank, we are very good at, are okay with, should work harder on, or have some problems with. And the second fill in the blank question is, there are times when it's difficult to get my partner's attention, agree or disagree. Then there is one, my future spouse is a better listener than talker, or a better talker than listener. With some of the couples, I use the drive-through window as an illustration. The person receiving your order has to listen very carefully to what you say so they can get the order right, so you don't end up with the wrong stuff. Then they repeat back to you what you said, and then they put it up on the screen and then ask you, is this what you ordered? A Big Mac, medium fries, a large Coke? Not a very nutritional meal. The point is, in order to communicate clearly, you have to listen carefully. When I was in college, it was axiomatic that the more listening I did in the classroom, the better grade I got. The more copious my notes, the better the result. In a Western civilization class, I listened intently to the professor and took several pages of notes every period, and my grade reflected that. In astronomy class, I listened little. I probably took several pages of notes the entire semester, and my grade corresponded to all the blank pages. In the spiritual sense, part of our James passage this morning tells us that we should be quick to hear, slow to speak. It is a spiritual issue because the more we listen, the more we care. The more we talk without listening, the less we care. The whole feel of Christ throughout the entire New Testament is that he did a lot of listening. It didn't matter who was doing the talking. In order to care, you see, Christ had to first listen. He listened to the blind man in his anguish. He listened to the woman who was caught in adultery and almost stoned to death. He listened to the one scourged by the dreaded disease of leprosy. He listened to the outcast Samaritan woman at the well. He listened to his disciples. He listened to the Roman centurion on the other side of the ledger who desperately wanted his servant to be healed. He listened to the religious elite who wanted him gone. He even listened to his executioner, Pontius Pilate, in his final moments. He even listened to the thief's plea on the cross. I don't know this for a fact, but I imagine that Jesus did a fair amount of talking and did a fair amount of teaching to get his saving message across. But I would say that he did a lot more listening than talking because he cared so deeply about everybody. Listening to others makes you a more sympathetic person. It makes you a more interesting person to others. But the challenge is always to take the focus off yourself long enough and listen long enough to the person who needs you the most at that particular time. Christian author Charles Swindoll tells the story of a time in his life when, as he put it, was caught in the undertow of so many commitments and therefore was easily distracted and wasn't listening to the people who needed him the most, his family. He said before too long, things around our home started to reflect the pattern of his frantic style. He distinctly recalled one evening the words of his youngest daughter. She wanted to tell her father something that happened that was very important in her life at school. And she quickly said to her father, "Daddy, I want to tell you something, but I got to say it really fast, I know." Suddenly realizing her frustration, he said to her, "Honey, you can tell me, and you don't have to do it really fast. Say it slowly." She then said, "Then listen slowly, Daddy." German pastor and martyr, we've heard his name before many times, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who died at the hands of the Nazis in a concentration camp. In his remarks on listening, he said, he who can no longer listen to his brother will soon no longer be listening to God. He who no longer can listen to his own brother will soon be listening not to God. Consider what our world would be like today if people listened more and cared more. More marriages would stay together. More children could be loved for and cared for by their parents. Families torn by internal conflict would find ways to reconcile the differences. Broken hearts could be mended. If both sides of the warring factions in universities and companies and other organizations truly listen to the other side of the story, it might clear the way for peace and progress. Think of the number of lives that could have been saved over generations of mankind if nations could arrive at the negotiating table long before the swords were drawn. In our own nation, if competing factions with high octane differences could sit down and truly listen to a different perspective, a different worldview, and most importantly, empathize with one another, divisions could be diminished and trust could replace mistrust. Jesus tells us to listen to one another. Listen sincerely. Listen intently. Try to walk a mile in the other person's shoes. In doing so, you show interest in another person's life, and the lines of communication suddenly open up like they have never done before. The great 19th and 20th century Polish pianist and composer and former Polish Prime Minister Ignacy Jan Paderewski, after playing a concert in a Midwestern American town, was seen backstage sitting by himself, sadly and alone. When asked if there was anything wrong, he replied, yes, that some friends of mine were missing tonight in the audience. You know, that gray-haired couple? They sit in about the fourth row. They were not in their usual seats. I didn't know them. I never spoke to them. But I liked the way they listened. And I always played for them. When someone's listening, you feel better about yourself. You feel better about others. You feel better about your relationship to God. Jesus said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Let us go to his table.